The wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain across the vast expanse of the Broken Arrow Ranch, as Ezra Kane rode the fence line, his weathered hands steady on the reins despite his 53 years. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the New Mexico sky in shades of copper and gold, but Ezra barely noticed the beauty that surrounded him. Beauty was a luxury he had long ago learned to live without. 27 years. That's how long it had been since he'd spoken to a woman for more than the brief exchanges required for business in town. 27 years since Martha had died, in childbirth, taking their unborn son with her into the darkness. The memory still cut through him like a blade, sharp and unforgiving, despite the passage of time. His ranch sprawled across 15,000 acres of high desert country, a kingdom of solitude that he ruled with iron discipline and careful isolation. The few hands he employed knew better than to bring their wives or daughters around the main house. Ezra paid them well, treated them fairly, but made it clear that the Broken Arrow was no place for feminine company. The irony wasn't lost on him, that he had built one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory. While living like a hermit, his longhorns were prized throughout the Southwest. His horses were sought after by cavalry officers and ranchers alike, and his reputation for fair dealing had made him wealthy beyond his simple needs. Yet none of it filled the hollow space that Martha's death had carved in his chest. As he approached the eastern boundary of his land, Ezra's horse suddenly shied, ears pricked forward in alarm. Years of living on the frontier had honed his instincts to a razor's edge, and he immediately reached for the Winchester rifle in his saddle scabbard. The Apache had been quiet for months, but that meant nothing. Quiet often preceded the storm. Then, he heard it, a sound that made his blood run cold. A woman's scream, high and desperate, carried on the evening wind. Ezra spurred his horse toward the sound, his heart hammering against his ribs. As he crested a low ridge, the scene below made him curse under his breath. 3 white men had cornered a young Apache woman against a cluster of red rocks, their intentions clear from their leering faces and the way they had torn her doe-skin dress. "Please," the woman was saying in accented English, her voice steady, despite her obvious terror. "I have done nothing to you." "Nothing," laughed the largest of the men, a bear of a figure with a scraggly beard and clothes that reeked of whiskey even from Ezra's distance. "You're Apache, ain't you? That's enough." Ezra recognized them now. The Garrett brothers, a trio of drifters and troublemakers who had been run out of every decent town from here to El Paso. They were the kind of men who gave the frontier a bad name, predators who preyed on the weak and defenseless. "Your daddy's Chief Nalmish, ain't he?" the second brother taunted. "The great war chief who's been raiding our settlements? Well, maybe it's time someone taught his little princess what happens to Apache scum." The woman's chin lifted defiantly. "My father will hunt you to the ends of the earth if you harm me." "Your father ain't here now, is he?" The third brother stepped closer, his hand reaching for her torn dress. "And when we're done with you, there won't be enough left for him to find." Ezra had heard enough. He guided his horse down the slope, his rifle trained on the largest brother. "That's far. Enough, boys." The 3 men spun around, their hands moving toward their weapons before they saw the Winchester pointed at them. Ezra's reputation as a marksman was well known in these parts, and even drunk, the Garretts weren't stupid enough to test it. "Well, well," the leader sneered, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty. "If it ain't the Hermit of Broken Arrow." "This ain't your concern, Kane. Just ride on back to your empty house and leave us to our business." "My business is keeping vermin off my land," Ezra replied, his voice deadly calm. "And you boys are definitely vermin." "Your land?" The second brother laughed nervously. "We're a good mile past your eastern fence." "Funny thing about that," Ezra said, never taking his eyes off them. "I just bought this section from the territorial government last week. Deeds already filed in Santa Fe. So you're trespassing on my property, threatening a woman under my protection." It was a lie, but a convincing one. The Garretts exchanged uncertain glances, their alcohol-fueled bravado beginning to waver. "Now," Ezra continued, "you have 2 choices. You can mount up and ride out of here, never to return. Or you can try your luck against my Winchester." I'm feeling generous today, so I'll let you choose. The Apache woman watched this exchange with dark eyes that missed nothing, her body tense and ready to run if the situation turned violent. Ezra found himself struck by her dignity in the face of terror, the way she held herself like a queen even with her dress torn and her hair disheveled. "This ain't over, Kane," the leader growled, but he was already backing toward their horses. "Yes," Ezra said quietly. "It is." The Garrett brothers rode away with curses and threats trailing behind them like smoke, but Ezra kept his rifle ready until they disappeared over the horizon. Only then did he turn his attention to the young woman, who stood watching him with eyes like polished obsidian. She was perhaps 25, with the high cheekbones and proud bearing of Apache nobility. Her long black hair had come loose from its braids during the struggle, framing a face that was both beautiful and fierce. Despite her torn clothing and obvious ordeal, she held herself with a dignity that commanded respect. "Are you hurt?" Ezra asked, dismounting but keeping his distance. He had learned long ago that Apache women were not to be approached carelessly, especially after what she had just endured. "I am unharmed," she replied in careful English, though her voice carried the musical cadence of her native tongue. "You have my gratitude, but I do not understand why you helped me. Most white men would have ridden away." Ezra considered the question, surprised by its directness. "Most white men aren't worth the powder to blow them to hell," he said finally. "Those three sure weren't." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "You speak truth. I am called Ayanna. Ezra Kane." He touched the brim of his hat. "Your father is Chief Nalnish?" Her expression grew guarded. "You know of him?" "I know he's an honorable man who's been pushed too far by people like the Garretts. I also know he's been trying to keep the peace while his young warriors want war." Ayanna studied him with new interest. "You speak as one who understands our ways. I understand that good people are good people regardless of the color of their skin or the language they speak." Ezra gestured toward his horse. "Can you ride? I'll take you back to your people." Ayanna hesitated, then shook her head. "I cannot return. Not yet." "Why not?" The pain that crossed her face was so raw that Ezra felt it like a physical blow. "Because I am the last," she whispered. "The last daughter of Nalnish. My sisters died in the cavalry raid on our winter camp. My mother died of the white man's sickness. I am all that remains of his bloodline, and he has promised me to Goyakla as a wife, to seal an alliance between our bands." Ezra knew the name. Goyakla, the one the whites called Geronimo, was a war chief whose hatred of the Yue white man burned like an eternal flame. The marriage would indeed be a powerful alliance, but it would also mean war. "And you don't want this marriage?" Ayanna's laugh was bitter. "Goyakla is a great warrior, but his heart is filled with such rage that there is no room for anything else. He sees me not as a woman, but as a symbol, a way to claim legitimacy over all the Apache bands. I would be a prize, not a wife." "So you ran." "I ran." She looked toward the mountains where her people waited. "But I cannot run forever. Goyakla will come for me. And when he does—" She didn't finish the sentence, but Ezra understood. A woman who defied such a powerful chief would face consequences worse than death. There might be another way, Ezra heard himself saying, the words surprising him even as he spoke them. What way? Ezra was quiet for a long moment, his mind racing through possibilities and consequences. What he was thinking was madness, but perhaps madness was what the situation required. "Marry me instead." The words hung in the air between them, like smoke from a gunshot. Ayanna stared at him as if he had spoken in tongues, her dark eyes wide with shock. "You... what?" "Marry me," Ezra repeated, his voice steadier now that the decision was made. Apache law recognizes marriage to outsiders, if it serves the tribe's interests. "A marriage to me would give your father a powerful ally without the bloodshed that would come from an alliance with Goyakla. It would also protect you from being forced into a union you don't want. But you are a stranger. You know nothing of me, and I know nothing of you beyond this moment. I know you're brave, Ezra said quietly. I know you're intelligent enough to speak 2 languages and diplomatic enough to try reasoning with men who had already decided to hurt you. I know you love your father enough to sacrifice yourself for peace, but you're strong enough to run when that sacrifice would only bring more war. Ayana was silent for a long time, her gaze moving from his face to the distant mountains and back again. And what would you gain from such a marriage? You live alone by choice. This much is clear. Why would you burden yourself with an Apache wife? The question cut deeper than she could know. Ezra thought of Martha, of the empty house that had been his prison for 27 years, of the loneliness that had become as much a part of him as his own shadow. Maybe, he said slowly, it's time I stopped living like a dead man. As the last light faded from the western sky, Ayana looked into the eyes of the strange white man who had appeared like a spirit to save her, and saw something there that made her heart skip. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it. The possibility of a life that was more than duty, more than sacrifice, more than the endless cycle of violence that had consumed her people. If I agree to this, she said finally, it must be a true marriage, not just words spoken for convenience. I will not be a guest in your house or a burden you bear out of pity. Agreed, Ezra said without hesitation. And you must understand that my people will test you. Goyakla will not accept this easily. There will be challenges, perhaps violence. I've been dealing with violence my whole life. I can handle whatever comes. Ayana nodded slowly, her decision crystallizing like ice forming on a winter pond. Then yes, Ezra Kane, I will marry you. The Apache camp sprawled across a hidden valley like a constellation of earthbound stars, cookfires twinkling in the gathering darkness as Ezra and Ayana approached on horseback. The scent of roasting meat and sage smoke drifted on the evening breeze, along with the sound of children's laughter and the low murmur of conversation in the musical Apache tongue. Ezra felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon him as they rode. Between the wickiups, the traditional dome-shaped dwellings of Ayana's people, warriors emerged from the shadows, their hands resting casually on their weapons while women gathered their children closer and peered at the white stranger with mixtures of curiosity and suspicion. They have never seen you before, Ayana explained quietly. To them, you are either a threat or an opportunity. We will discover which soon enough. At the center of the camp stood a larger wickiup, its entrance flanked by 2 massive warriors whose scarred faces spoke of countless battles. As Ezra and Ayana dismounted, one of the guards disappeared inside, returning moments later with a gesture for them to enter. Chief Nalnish was a man who commanded respect simply by existing. Though past 60, his frame was still powerful, his back straight as a lodgepole pine. His weathered face bore the marks of a lifetime spent protecting his people, and his dark eyes held the weight of decisions that had cost him everything he held dear. My daughter returns, he said in English, his voice carrying both relief and reproach. And she brings a white man to our sacred place. Father, Ayana replied, dropping to one knee in the traditional gesture of respect. I bring Ezra Kane, who saved my life and my honor from the Garrett brothers. Nalnish's eyes sharpened. The Garretts, those dogs still breathe? They do, Ezra said, stepping forward. But they won't trouble your people again. I made that clear. You speak with confidence for a man surrounded by Apache warriors, came a voice from the shadows. A figure emerged into the firelight. Tall, lean, with eyes that burned like coals and a face marked by ritual scars. Goyakla, Geronimo himself. I speak with the confidence of a man who has nothing to hide. Ezra replied evenly. I came here to speak truth, not to make threats. Goyakla's laugh was like the sound of breaking glass. Truth? What truth can a white man speak to the Apache? Your people have given us nothing but lies and broken promises. My people? Ezra's voice hardened. I don't speak for anyone but myself. And I've never made a promise to the Apache that I've broken, because I've never made a promise to the Apache before tonight. And what promise would you make now? Nalnish asked, his tone carefully neutral. Ezra looked at Ayana, who nodded almost imperceptibly. I ask for your daughter's hand in marriage. The silence that followed was so complete that Ezra could hear the crackling of the fire and the distant cry of a night bird. Then Goyakla exploded into motion, his hand moving to his knife. You dare, he snarled. She is promised to me. The alliance between our bands depends on this marriage. The alliance depends on stopping the cycle of violence that's destroying both our peoples, Ezra said, not backing down despite the blade now pointed at his throat. Ayanna told me about your plans. You want to unite the Apache bands for war against the whites. How many of your people will die in that war? How many children will never see their fathers again? Better to die as warriors than to live as slaves on the white man's reservation, Goyakla spat. There's a third option, Ezra said quietly. Peace. Real peace. Not the kind that comes from surrender, but the kind that comes from mutual respect and understanding. Nalnish held up a hand, and Goyakla reluctantly stepped back, though his eyes never left Ezra's face. Speak your proposal, white man. My name is Ezra Kane. I own the Broken Arrow Ranch, 15,000 acres of good grazing land with water rights to the Rio Pecos. I employ 30 men and run 5,000 head of cattle. I have contracts with the army and with ranchers throughout the territory. Ezra paused, letting the implications sink in. A marriage alliance with me would give your people access to legitimate trade, protection under territorial law, and a voice in the territorial government. And what would you gain? Nalnish asked. Ezra glanced at Ayanna, seeing the tension in her posture, the way she held herself ready for whatever came next. I would gain a wife who is brave enough to defy tradition for the sake of peace, intelligent enough to bridge two worlds, and strong enough to stand beside me as an equal partner. Pretty words, Goyakla sneered. But words are wind. How do we know you will not tire of your Apache wife and cast her aside when the novelty fades? Because, Ezra said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction, I buried my first wife 27 years ago, and I swore I would never love another woman. If I'm willing to break that oath, it's not for novelty. It's because I've found someone worth the risk. Ayanna's sharp intake of breath was audible in the silence. She stared at Ezra with new understanding, seeing the depth of the sacrifice he was offering, the walls he was willing to tear down for her sake. Nalnish studied Ezra for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. You speak of love, but you have known my daughter for less than a day. How can you claim to love what you do not know? I don't claim to love her yet, Ezra admitted. But I claim the possibility of love. I claim the hope of it. And I claim that hope is worth more than all the certainty in the world if that certainty leads only to death and sorrow. And you, my daughter? Nalnish turned to Ayanna. What say you to this proposal? Ayanna rose gracefully, her chin lifted in the proud gesture Ezra was beginning to recognize. I say that I have spent my life watching our people suffer and die while men make decisions based on pride and anger. I say that this man offered me a choice when no one else would. I say that if there is a chance, even a small chance, that this marriage could bring peace to our people and the whites, then it is worth the risk. And if there is no peace? Goyakla demanded. If the whites continue to take our land, kill our warriors, force our children into their schools to forget our ways? Then we will face that together, Ayanna said firmly. But we will have tried something other than war. We will have tried hope. Nalnish was quiet for a long time, his eyes moving between his daughter, the white rancher, and the war chief who had been his ally. Finally, he spoke. There will be tests, he said. Trials to prove your worthiness, white man. If you fail them, the marriage will not take place, and Goyakla's claim will stand. What kind of tests? Ezra asked. Nalnish's smile was sharp as a blade. The kind that will show us whether you are truly worthy of an Apache daughter, or just another white man with pretty words and a weak heart. Dawn broke over the Apache camp like a war cry, painting the eastern mountains in shades of blood and gold. Ezra had spent the night in a guest wickiup, staring at the hide ceiling and wondering what he had gotten himself into. The tests, Nalnish had promised, would begin with the sunrise, and failure would mean not just the loss of Ayanna, but likely his life as well. The first trial was announced by the thundering of hooves as a magnificent black stallion was led into the center of camp. The horse was a creature of pure wildness, its eyes rolling white with fury, its hooves striking sparks from the rocky ground as it fought against the rawhide ropes that barely contained it. This is Diablo, Nalnish announced, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd of Apache warriors and their families. He has killed 2 men who tried to break him. If you would marry an Apache daughter, you must prove you can master the spirits of the wild. Ezra studied the stallion, noting the intelligence in its eyes along with the rage. This wasn't just a test of horsemanship. It was a test of understanding, of the ability to read the heart of a wild thing and find common ground. No saddle, Goyakla added with a cruel smile. No bridle, only your hands and your will against his. Ezra nodded, stripping off his shirt and boots. He approached the stallion slowly, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. The horse's ears flattened against its skull, but Ezra continued forward, speaking in low, soothing tones. Easy, boy. I know what it's like to be caged, to have your freedom taken away. I know what it's like to rage against the world because everything you loved has been torn from you. The stallion's ears pricked forward slightly as if recognizing something in Ezra's voice. When Ezra reached out his hand, the horse didn't strike, though its muscles remained coiled like springs. The difference between us, Ezra continued, his hand now resting on the stallion's neck, is that I chose my cage. I built it myself, brick by brick, year by year, until I forgot what freedom felt like. But you remember, don't you? In one fluid motion, Ezra vaulted onto the stallion's back. The horse exploded into motion, bucking and spinning with a fury that would have unseated most riders in seconds. But Ezra held on, not fighting the horse's movements but flowing with them, becoming part of the wild dance. For 10 minutes that felt like hours, man and beast struggled for dominance. Then gradually, the stallion's movements began to change. The frantic bucking became a powerful gallop. The rage transformed into something approaching partnership. When Ezra finally brought the horse to a stop in front of Nalnish, both man and animal were breathing hard, but there was a new understanding between them. The first trial is past, Nalnish announced, though his expression remained neutral. But there are 2 more. The second trial came at midday, when the sun was a merciless eye in the cloudless sky. Ezra was led to a circle of stones where Goyakla waited, stripped to the waist, his scarred torso gleaming with sweat and war paint. Combat, the war chief said simply. Knives only. First blood wins. Ezra accepted the blade offered to him, a wicked curve of steel that felt alien in his hand. He was more comfortable with guns than knives, but he had learned enough in his years on the frontier to know which end to hold. They circled each other like wolves, each looking for an opening. Goyakla was faster, more experienced with the blade, but Ezra had reach and the desperate strength of a man fighting for more than just his life. The war chief struck first, his knife whistling through the air where Ezra's throat had been a heartbeat before. Ezra countered with a thrust that Goyakla barely deflected, the blade scoring a thin line across his ribs. First blood to the white man, Nalnish called, but Goyakla shook his head. A scratch is not blood, he snarled, pressing his attack with renewed fury. For 20 minutes they fought, their blades ringing together in a deadly symphony. Both men bore cuts and scrapes, but nothing that could be called a true wound. Then, Goyakla overextended himself in a vicious thrust, and Ezra's blade found its mark, opening a gash across the war chief's forearm that immediately began to bleed. Second trial passed, Nalnish announced, and this time there was a note of approval in his voice. The final trial came as the sun was setting, painting the sky in the same colors as the morning. Ayana appeared at Ezra's side, her face painted with traditional designs, her dress replaced by the ceremonial garments of an Apache bride. The last test is not of strength or skill, she said quietly. It is of truth. You must drink the sacred peyote and speak your heart before the spirits. If you lie, if you hold back any part of yourself, the spirits will know and you will die. Ezra looked into her dark eyes and saw his own fear reflected there. And if I tell the truth? Then we will know if this marriage is blessed by the spirits or cursed by them. The peyote ceremony took place in a sacred cave high in the mountains, lit only by the flickering flames of a small fire. Ezra drank the bitter brew and felt reality begin to shift and blur around him. Colors became sounds. Sounds became visions, and the boundaries between past and present dissolved like smoke. He found himself speaking, the words pouring out of him like water from a broken dam. He spoke of Martha, of the guilt that had consumed him for 27 years, of the emptiness that had driven him to build walls around his heart. He spoke of his fear that he was too broken to love again, too damaged to be worthy of Ayana's trust. I am not a good man, he heard himself saying, his voice echoing strangely in the cave. I am selfish and stubborn and afraid. I have lived like a coward for so long that I've forgotten how to be brave. But she makes me want to remember. She makes me want to be the man I was before the world broke me. Through the haze of the peyote, he saw Ayana's face, tears streaming down her painted cheeks. He saw Nalnish nodding slowly, and even Koyakla's expression had softened from hatred to something approaching respect. "The spirits have heard you," Nalnish said, his voice seeming to come from very far away. "They have seen your heart, and they find it worthy. The marriage is blessed." As dawn broke over the mountains, Ezra Kane and Ayana, daughter of Nalnish, were wed according to Apache custom. The ceremony was simple but profound, binding them not just to each other but to the hope of peace between their peoples. Standing, together as husband and wife, watching the sun rise over a land that had known too much blood and sorrow, they both understood that their marriage was more than a union of two hearts. It was a bridge between worlds, a promise that love could triumph over hatred, that understanding could overcome fear. The trials were over, but their real journey was just beginning. Together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that they had found in each other not just love, but the courage to hope for a better tomorrow. As the Apache camp celebrated around them, Ezra pulled his wife close and whispered in her ear, "Thank you for teaching me how to live again." Ayana smiled, her eyes bright with tears and joy. "Thank you for showing me that some white men keep their promises." The last daughter of Chief Nalnish had found her destiny, and the solitary rancher had found his heart. In a land where love was often the first casualty of conflict, they had chosen to believe in its power to heal and transform. Their story was just beginning,